My goal is to make this very short so we have time to actually talk about what we've just been hearing about, because it's really great stuff. And I could make it really short by saying, yeah, what they said, only for the Olympic Peninsula. I'm feeling a little inadequate because apparently there's people out there with 27 years of data, and we have about 15 or 16. So I'd like to acknowledge all the folks that we work with in Department of Ecology, the Lower Elwha-Clallam Tribe, Weyerhaeuser Corporation, our company, and WDFW. There's just a whole slew, as you all know, of people that are involved with this. So we work, I think we're the farthest north, if I'm not correct. Anyway, our primary question is the same as everybody else's, I think, or very similar. Can we go in to a set of watersheds and bring back what was once there? The suite of restoration actions over time, can we restore things from anthropogenic problems? And I'll go through the history of the watersheds, but you know, can we do this by increasing the wood loading? Can we remove culverts or improve bridges? Can we just get rid of roads that are there historically? And can we provide some floodplain reconnection that may have been cut off by these various anthropogenic actions? So our study area, we actually have 3 streams, 2 treatment and 1 control. And they are all very similar. 2 of them are actually called twins, East Twin and West Twin, and they're very aptly named. They are similar to the 10 Mile and Cummins Creek, where these streams enter directly into the Strait of Juan to Fuca with very little estuary. You know, they go from freshwater to saltwater immediately. So that's a little bit different than some of the other IMWs. And they're actually fairly small watersheds, only 32 to 45 square kilometers, about 6 miles or 10 kilometers of anadromous main stem habitat. There's not a huge amount of tributary habitat in West Twin. There's a little bit more in East Twin and Deep Creek. And they're wet. You know, starting now, it's raining. It'll probably rain until maybe May. We hope, because it's been pretty dry. And it's kind of a mishmash of geological formations out there with volcanic, sedimentary, glacial impacts. So this particular photograph or map, if I can get the laser pointer here. There we go. What you're seeing is the dark area right here is the anadromous area, and overlaid by areas that have been treated with restoration activities. So you can see that West Twin hasn't been treated at all, and East Twin has been treated fairly, I wouldn't call it heavily, but over a large scale a little bit. And Deep Creek has actually been treated a little more heavily percentage-wise of the watershed. Give you a rundown of the problems, I guess, that have occurred, some natural and many not so natural. Fire was prevalent on a, I wouldn't say regular basis, but there are some really large events that were stand replacing fires. Historically, we know from probably tree coring by the Forest Service. In 1308 and 1508, the entire watershed burned over. And then there was a few more fires between the late 1890s and about 1940. And timber harvest started in the 1890s, both by truck logging and also railroad logging. So you're building railroads in these small watersheds across steep terrain, placing roads in there. And of course, at that time, engineering was, you put it where you could and you kind of, you know, the heck with the consequences. So what that led to was quite a bit of sediment delivery. As these roads started to fail, they cut roads on steep slopes. You get a lot of water in a short amount of time, and all of a sudden everything cuts loose. In Deep Creek in 1990, there was a really large failure that created a dam break flood that just sent sediment blowing down the entire watershed, especially some of the smaller tributaries. And in the East Twin River in 2006, after poor Mike McHenry had just placed a whole bunch of wood up there, we got a massive event that unloaded the upper watershed, or not the upper watershed, but the anadromous area of the watershed, and it piled everything he put in a span of about 100 meters by maybe 50 meters. So looked all great, and then kaboom, it was all gone. So we're working through that at the moment. So the plans here are to try to reduce those landslides, those slope failures, get a little bit of the riparian action going again with spruce and fir planting. And as we've been talking about, those things take time. And we're getting back to the 10-year question. Gee, what do we know in 10 years? Well, we don't know anything. Trees are that big. They started from here and now they're that big. So getting riparian zones for shading and for actually wood input later on takes a lot of time. So to offset that time, they've gone in mostly with helicopter and large machinery, placed key pieces and log jams, and some other things like boulder weirs, but that's a little less prevalent. So east twin, and maybe you can see that better than I can see that, but the colors are showing what type of restoration has occurred. So the light green is the key pieces. The black would be wood placement, as in probably large log jams, and road decommissioning, where they just blocked off the road and let it go back to natural state, and barrier removal, which is a fair bit less. That's in Sadie Creek, which is a tributary to East Twin. They pulled some culverts and improved the road passage, or the travel passage over the streams. Tiny bit of off-channel habitat, which is represented by this right here, and that's actually one little pond that they dug on a piece of private property because the landowner thought it was really cool and wanted to be helpful, which is great. Unfortunately, I don't think it's actually been active in the last 12 years, but So Deep Creek, similar, with a lot of wood placement in the form of log jams, a lot of wood placement in the form of key pieces. Much of that was helicoptered in due to access. Just couldn't get a cat up in the stream to where they needed to put these structures in, especially up in the smaller tributaries up in the East Fork and the West Fork. A little bit more off-channel habitat. There was some ponds that they were able to access a little bit, and I'm not sure that they're even active anymore. And you see there's a couple of tributaries, Sampson Creek and Gibson Creek, and those are actually so small that I can step across them in the wintertime. So there is some off-channel habitat, there is some tributary habitat or smaller tributary habitat, but not a whole lot in these watersheds. As we're learning, the whole Backy design might just be a pipe dream. Seems like everybody says, yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, gee, it didn't work. And so the same happened with us. That was our intent, was to gather some pre-project data, put in the wood structures, and then do the monitoring afterward. And that for us did not happen, because as soon as we decided to do this, then the money became available to get these projects in, and you got to go when you got to go. And so the projects went in prior to any pre-project data. So then it became an intensive post-treatment design, and we're looking at the differences in the fish response populations and the habitat trends over time in the treatment and control watersheds. So I'm going to jump to the biological first, and this is pit tag data. This is resulting from pit tag data. We have pit tag arrays at the mouths of these streams. They're very close to salt water, so if something passes by, we pretty much know it's out the door. There's a very few that might come back a little bit. We know they don't pile up in the last 200 meters downstream, because I think Thomas actually helped me do that. We snorkeled from saltwater up to the antennas, and we thought, well, if we see 1 million fish, then we know they're not leaving the building. And we didn't, so they're out the door. So what we found was some really interesting things with life history. And Jason Hall put this together, and so I'll lead you through the various pathways. Coho can emerge, and they can, in the spring, just head out the door. We know that. We catch them in the traps. And we don't really know their fate, because we can't mark them. We don't have any otolith data as of yet, but we're getting there. So we don't know their fate. The others with the pit tags, some leave in the fall. In fact, a whole lot leave in the fall. And as it turns out, they do spend some time in the ocean and they come back as adults. About a third of the adult population is from these fall migrants. Then you have your typical one winter in the stream, and then you either have a jack or an adult. And then there are fish that swap streams. So they'll go from one, they'll show up in the other, stay up there, and then they'll leave, which is kind of fun too. And this similar steelhead, we do have a lot of fry migrants, and there's also a lot of parr migrants. In fact, again, I'll show you later that it's more than the smolt. And then they have quite a, obviously, steelhead are pretty much, they'll do what they want. You know, one winter go and then come back, and they'll come back into the stream, and then they'll go back out to salt water. Or stay in the stream for 1 or 2 winters, and then go out and then come back 1 or 2 years later. So they're kind of all over the board, but with the longer we do this, the more we learn about what they're doing. So, and this is, as I indicated, about 2/3 of the coho leave before winter even, and over half of the juvenile mykiss leave before winter, or in the early stages of winter. We do see them swapping streams, which is kind of fun. East twin and west twin are so close together that I'm no towering giant, but if I stand on one bridge and anybody else stands on the other bridge, we could see each other. Deep Creek's about 4 miles down the road. So there's a small subset, less than 1%, that do that, but there's some. And what are we seeing with that? And we're finding that size matters. So the smaller fish tend to leave earlier, and if we can increase the amount of habitat to maybe counteract some density dependence, maybe get some bigger fish, then we could have them either stay over winter and leave as smolts, which have better survival rates, or if they just leave, even if they leave early and they're larger, they might be better off getting to the ocean as larger fish. So kind of 2 strategies that we could hope for with the restoration is maybe we can get these fish a little bit bigger before they go out. So here's what since we're comparing watersheds, treatment control, this is just the treatment divided by the control. And Deep Creek, oops, sorry about that. Deep Creek is up here, and you see there's just huge interannual variability. Getting back that is 10 years enough. But there is a response. We're seeing that the smolt per spawner has increased over the treatment. And East Twin hasn't really. I mean, it's right there, dead level with coho. And then also, we're getting a little bit of an increase in smolts per spawners with the mykiss. This is parr density from our electrofishing data over these sites. And you know, we are seeing again that there's a little bit of an increase in Deep Creek, and East Twin is kind of holding even, although the interannual variability is really large. One thing that's interesting is that the trends over time, the streams are pretty highly correlated. You know, the trends over time, treatment and control, the 2 treatments and the control all seem to track relatively well. This is a survival index of just basically our pit tags that we put in and our pit tags that we've seen go out. So East Twin, we are seeing a little bit high, whoops, there's that darn button again. East Twin we're seeing a little bit, but again, if you go right across the one line there of nothing happening, it bounces so much it's really hard to tell at this point what's going on. And Deep Creek, you actually can see an increase over time. And the reason you'll notice that Deep Creek starts at 2008, and that's when our antennas went in and we started pit tagging. We have habitat data and fish density data from 2004 and on, but our pit tag data for Deep Creek starts in 2008. And then again, this is kind of the same same picture, different way. Again, you can see that Deep Creek has been increasing over time, and we'd love to say, hey, that's great. That's an increase due to our restoration activities, and it might be. We'll have to wait and see how, say, East Twin reacts over time, and just again monitor for another 10 years. Hopefully, that would be great. So, what did we find? One thing we found is what I just showed you, that the most obvious changes started in about 2009 to 2015. Deep Creek juvenile survival is better than West Twin, and one of the main findings was that Coho and Steelhead both show multiple life history strategies, some that we didn't expect, or some that it's fortunately becoming more widely known now. There's work in Oregon showing that there's fallout migrants of coho that are actually returning as adults. So being able to look over the year, throughout the year, has really been helpful. We are seeing a positive trend in the yearling coho and O mykiss migrants. And getting back to, if you want to survive, you should probably be a yearling. If you go out as an age 0 for O mykiss anyway, that's a loser. I mean, we at this point do not see anything from any adults returned from our sub-yearling migrants. Coho we have, which I've shown you. And Deep Creek does have a higher proportion of the yearling migrants, and maybe that's why we're seeing a difference. Again, as I mentioned, these streams are all fairly highly correlated among them, so that we do actually have a good reference and treatment. EMAP monitoring has shown an increase in the gravel in West Fork Deep Creek, which is a small tributary to Deep Creek, after restoration activities, which is great. But it's hard to see any difference in, say, wood loading over the course of it, because we're only monitoring a very small percentage of the watershed, and we're also only treating a very small percentage of the watershed. So with that in mind, treating a small portion between really high interannual variability and some of these restoration projects that have just blown out of the door, it's really difficult to attribute anything to these actions. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to do some juvenile fish sampling. I think the decision to leave comes far earlier than when we actually get them in the fall or in the summer. So we'll try to get some more information earlier, take some smolt lengths and weights over the weeks during smolt season and see if condition factor makes a difference. We've got some adult coho otoliths that we're going to process and look at those, see if we can correlate that to the pit tag life history information. And also go back and look at some historical photos, both aerial and on the ground, to show that, yes, in fact, we did make a difference. Here's the pictures that show it, even though the EMAP data might not actually show that trend. And there you have it. Beautiful picture by John McMillan of